welcome everyone. Good afternoon again. I am Vince Jackson, the Executive Director of the Greater Northampton Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome all of you to the very first educational program for 2025, featuring Colleen DelVecchio. We appreciate you offering this course, and we also want to say thanks to our sponsor, Florence Bank. They believe that when we're all informed and well educated, it's good for our economy and it's good for our community. So we appreciate them for their sponsorship. And again, thank you, Colleen, for sharing your expertise and helping us understand what it means to navigate change in the workplace.
Sure. Well, thanks everyone for being here. I'm going to get started. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right. Folks see my screen? We're all good? Excellent. Okay. So thanks everyone. As been said, I am Colleen DelVecchio. I run Maxity. We are a coaching and training company that works with organizations. We are strengths-based, and a lot of the work we do is to help both individuals and companies to kind of manage workplace change. So my favorite change quote that is from Frankenstein that I always start with is, "Nothing is so painful as to the human mind as a great and sudden change." And, you know, for some people, they love change, right? Some people thrive on it. Some people do really well with change. Other people cannot, they really, really dislike change. But I think the hard part for most people is when change is sudden and they don't know about it, right? When it just seems to happen to them and that they didn't understand it or things like that. I did mean to say before we started, we are a small group. So if you have any questions or thoughts or comments as we're doing this, feel free to unmute yourself and just jump in. Sometimes I feel like it's hard to look at the chat box and try to read that while kind of talking as well. So feel free to jump in with any questions or thoughts you have as we kind of go through this as well. All right, so I grab a piece of paper and a pen if you don't have one in front of you, and I want to start with some squiggles. So first thing I want you to do is literally just draw a couple of squiggles on a piece of paper. I say fill the box with squiggles. Sometimes when I have a handout for folks in person, we have a box that we put them in, but really just draw a couple of squiggles for yourself. And again, as you can see, these are not, this is not high level art. This is just some really basic squiggles. All right, so you got your squiggles. All right, next, I want you to add some beaks to them. We're going to add some little triangles. We're going to add a beak to all your squiggles. Now we're going to add a couple of eyes to each one. Just, drop a couple of eyes on every one somewhere near the beak in an appropriate place for where eyes might be. Finally, I'm going to add like little fork-like things on the bottom, which will be your feet. And all of a sudden, your little squiggles have become birds. Right? We now have birds instead of just some random little squiggles on a page. And so I love starting all my change workshops with squiggle birds, simply because I always think if a squiggle can become a bird, like, you can change. It's okay. Like, we're going to get through this. You're going to be able to find a way to kind of move things forward. And if literally a little tiny squiggle on a piece of paper can now look like a cute bird in a non, high-end artist way, we all can do this. So I think the hardest part of change for almost everybody and all the teams I work with is the kind of emotional piece of it, right? It's not the actual change itself that is the hardest part in most cases, but often it's the emotional piece. So when we think about, this kind of emotional piece of change, it kind of goes through this like, okay, what's happening? And like to get to the point where we are all kind of completely adjusted and working well, it takes a little while to get there. Oops, sorry, I clicked too quickly. Let me get back to it. So when I start, oh my goodness, my mouse is very, very sensitive today. I will keep my hands away from it now. So when I talk about change, I always think in the beginning, people are shocked, right? So think about when I think about this from a workplace standpoint, my guess is all of you at some point in time have had payroll change at the company that you work for. If this has happened recently to you, you are probably glitching at the moment because this is never, it feels like it's never an easy thing. And I've worked with a lot of companies through when they've changed things like payroll or they change an email system, right? These are things that have had drastic change. If you're someone like me, you know, with our gray hair here in our 50s, right? I think of my first job out of college, right? Everything was on paper. We had one computer in our office and we used to sign it out by person. Like you could sign up for like a couple of hours here and there to use the computer, right? So I think of just that drastic change that's happening there. So in the beginning, people are always shocked, like, oh my God, I can't believe we're doing this, right? I can't believe we are getting a new email system. I can't believe, right? If it's something as simple as, you know, I worked at one place and they changed the coffee, that brand that they got, and you think the world collapsed for some people, right? There's this moment of like, I can't believe this is happening, right? You're shocked. People go into denial mode, like this can't be happening. We can't possibly be changing our email system again, right? We can't, there's no chance we are at, like, we're just not going to do it. It's never going to happen, right? I've worked at places where someone will say, oh, we're changing over to a new CRM or something like that. And everyone's like, yeah, it's going to take forever. And then the frustration part starts to happen, right? People get frustrated with either the lack of movement on change, right? If you're someone who is excited about the idea of a new email system and it gets told to you, hey, we're getting a new email system, and nothing happens, you start to get frustrated. You get frustrated with different processes that are coming in place. And then usually people hit that point of they're just like frustrated and sad and mad and like all of those big emotions. And eventually you get people to get to the experimenting phase. Okay, right, I have to do this. If it's something like payroll or email, you have no choice, right? There are times that for the change, you have absolutely no choice. And so now you're starting to kind of see, okay, can I do this? Eventually you start to adapt to it. And finally you get to the point where you are completely adjusted to the change and you don't remember how it used to be, right? You're like, oh yeah, can't wait. I can't even remember how hard it was to do our jobs without email. Uh, I think a few months ago, my daughter said to me, like, if you had to tell everybody in your company information, like what did you used to do before you had email, right? And I was like, oh, we would print, like we actually had somebody in the office who pretty much their entire job was there was a copy room right in the building and their whole job was to like make copies of things and shove them in everybody's boxes, right? I think of how many, I would probably have 10 pieces of paper in my mailbox every single day that were just like company announcements kind of thing, right? Because that was the only way you did it. I remember getting to a point at one place where they would use like a voicemail system and everyone would get a voicemail. We thought that was so, crazy cool. Like, look at us saving a couple of sheets of paper every day. So you kind of get through this emotional roller coaster for change. But I feel like it ends up in this kind of three-phase process for most people, right? It starts with the idea of endings, right? There's going to be a loss. No matter what the change is, there are going to be folks who liked things the way they were. I do a lot of work with the Gallup-Clifton Strengths Assessment, and there is a strength that is consistency, right? There are people who their world revolves around things being consistent. They like things to be consistent. They like things to be the same way. So when something is changed, there's going to be those moments of loss. Then you hit the transition phase, which for many people, this is the confusing part, right? This is the part where they're like, okay, are we half in? Are we half out? Are we doing it this way? Are we doing it the old way? What have we adopted to the new things? And then you think of the new beginnings, right? Where you accept it. And when I think of change, like, yes, there are big things like let's change a whole technology system. Let's change where you work. But think of simple things like, have you ever rearranged the furniture in your living room? Right? You rearrange the furniture in the living room. And I think of my dog who probably has the endings and the lost moment when I do that, because I remember rearranging at one point and my dog coming in the room and being like, wait a second, like my chair is not in the window anymore where I can lay on it and look out the window. Right? You could see the look of loss on his face. But there was that like moment for him. Then there was the confusion part for the whole family where all of us managed to bang our shins on the coffee table every day for a week. Right? Like you moved it, you've been going the same path all the time from the couch to the kitchen or the bathroom, like wherever way you're going. But now you're starting to hit your leg on things. And then you fast forward a month or two, and now you're not doing that anymore. Right? Like your body knows how to twist and turn and to make the right steps because you've gotten used to this change. So even things like that, you can see how it takes you through kind of three different phases here. When I think of these, though, when I think of this with staff and working with teams, you have to look at this into kind of shifts for folks. And the first one is the mindset shift. When things are ending, you have to get people to think there, right? They have to be able to think about what is the possibility out there? What is that thing that's changing? And can they kind of think about it and in their brain kind of start to get there? The next piece is getting their behaviors to shift. Can you start to see people change their behaviors and do things slightly, differently? And then eventually your routine shifts. I always love the move the coffee table idea because in the beginning, you're like, this is a great idea. We're going to rearrange the living room and put the table here. This looks like it looks so much better. This is a great idea. We're thinking this through. We're starting to get there and we're hitting our knee on it every day. And then we're finally living there. I don't know why my mouse is just so jumpy today. So in that beginning part, in the endings, these are the things I hear from folks, right? I hear people say things like, I just want to keep doing it how I was doing it. Like, why do we need to change it? Right? When I work with teams and we're doing kind of a staff reorganization, I hear things like, I liked the other people I worked with. Like, why do I have to work with new people now? Why do I have to learn new things? Oh God, my time and energy is getting so wasted doing this, right? This is a bad idea. This won't work. Usually during the endings phase, people are super negative. And when you're working with a team, one of the best ways to start to move the needle on that is to find the folks on the team who are excited about the change and make sure that you are communicating everything to them, right? Get your people who are your like change agents and like your change supporters and make sure that you are really, as kind of the leader or the person doing the change, spending more time with them because they're the ones who are probably eventually going to help change the mindset of others, right? They're the ones who are going to be able to get it out. Because often, if you are the leader of the change, people are still going to be stuck here. It often takes a peer or someone who did not come up with the idea themselves to say, oh, like I can see where this is helpful to kind of get that mindset shift happening. In the transition phase, this is where you're hoping to see and you're starting to see the behaviors of your staff and your team shift. And you start to think about, people start to worry about things like, okay, so what's going to happen to all the old stuff we're doing? I think of one place I worked where we went from paper files to electronic files, right? And everybody was like, what are we going to do with all these file cabinets worth of stuff, right? It was such a big question for so long. And eventually it was like, at a certain amount of time, we're just going to shred everything that's in the old file cabinets because we realize we never, ever, ever use them. Right, do you figure these things out? People also start to worry about what else is going to change. Like, is there a domino effect here? When you are changing things like technology, right? People worrying about how it's going to work. They're worried about, do they have the skills? If you are a leader in these situations, if you want behaviors to shift, you have to make sure that you are getting people all of the training that they need, right? They need to really understand this. And they need to have that training close to when you're going to start using it, particularly if it's a technology change, or right, any change where you're expecting people to have different behaviors regularly. You can't teach something and then 3 months later expect people to remember it and to start the change then. I've seen this happen. One company that I was working with, they did all of this technology training in the fall for a new product that they rolled out in January. So there were people who had the training in September, and now that January has come around, they're shocked that people didn't remember the 1 hour training they went to on how to use this new system. Right? It's not, it doesn't really work that way. Um, and this is, again, if you can find those people who understood it, who got it, who maybe used that in the past, who love this change, getting them to be your kind of evangelists out there. And then the end here, right, is this is where you finally get people to shift their routine. They start to see the potential for these things. They start to feel ready to learn. They're excited to try something new. Um, they can see how this might be better. They're thinking about the positives. Often you have to be able to pitch these positives to people when you're talking about the change. Okay, so now let's talk about how this actually rolls out, right? There's three kind of pieces to this. One is communicating. So communicating the why, communicating the change. The next is knowing that everyone's going to approach this differently. And the last I always say to folks when you're dealing with change is to show as much compassion as you can. For those of you who are not here at the beginning, I am going to drop, I did have a handout here that has some of this information on it. So I just dropped that in the chat. And I mentioned at the beginning that we will send out the slide deck to folks as well. Okay. So let's start with kind of acknowledging the need for change. This is behind the why. When changes happen, particularly in a workplace, often there is a team of people who have gotten together who've decided that this change is necessary, right? So when you think about this, often this is the leadership team, often this, or it might be, an operations team, or maybe it's the HR team, right? Like it's one particular group that has typically decided we need a change. We need to change something. We need to change our process, how things are going. We need to reorganize the teams, whatever it is. And the problem that tends to happen, which makes it really hard to get people to kind of move along, is that the folks that this impacts don't know the why behind the change. They haven't been told why we need this change, right? So often it might be as simple as, we just don't like the payroll system. Like people like it doesn't work, and someone else is thinking, oh, right, why? Like, why doesn't it work, right? People need the context behind this. So if you're able to communicate the why behind the change, this helps people get through those emotions a lot faster. If they can understand why your team has decided that this change is necessary. And I think often we assume people know that why. People understand that why. People know the reasoning behind why we need to have a change because it might seem super obvious to you. One company I worked with changed how they did their travel reimbursements, the mileage reimbursements. And one of the things they did was they kind of rejigged people's roles and a lot of their travel based on where they lived. So there was lower mileage reimbursement, right? So this was a nonprofit. So from a nonprofit standpoint, they were saving like $100,000 that year, which to them meant that's a big amount of money for a nonprofit to be able to put to programs, right? But a lot of the staff came forward and they were like, they always saw that travel reimbursement as like extra money. They saw it almost as bonuses in their paycheck. So all of a sudden, the staff, who the higher ups thought, okay, we're saving money, people aren't having to drive as far, isn't this all great? That wasn't all communicated down. And a lot of staff just simply said, I'm just getting paid less, right? That's how they took it. And so without communicating the kind of need for this change and the background behind it, right? It made a big difference. So to be able to share that made really help them out. The next is thinking about how you're actually going to communicate these changes, right? So and who do you have to communicate them to? So when you're thinking about this, are you thinking, right, how do you actually communicate things that everybody who needs to hear this is going to hear this? So are these, right, all of the staff? And thinking about the staff at every different level within your organization, right? Are there people who do not sit at a computer all day, so they're not going to get the email, or they only check their email once a week because of the job that they have? Right. And for those of us who sit at our desk all day, every day, we're like, how could someone only check their email once a week? But for sure, there are people who that happens, right? I mean, there are many people who have those types of positions, and thinking about how do you get it out there? What language are you using? Are you making sure that you're getting the right information to everybody so they really understand this? So the next part is getting behind this idea that everybody has a different lens on kind of how they see the world. This is where I always think about the Gallup-Clifton strengths, right? The chance of you and somebody else having your same top 5 strengths. There are 34 strengths in the Gallup world. And if you have the same top 5 as someone, the chances of that in the exact same order is 1 in 33.1 million. So I always think you are not going to see things the same way other people see them. You're not going to react to information the same way everybody else reacts. And when things like change come about, we're all going to experience change, the exact same change, in a very different way, right? Because of how we see the world, because of how we are out there and doing things. So to know this is really important. So when I think of this from a strength standpoint, and you could do this from any standpoint, but because I do a lot of work with strengths, this is to me the easiest way to explain this, right? When I think about strengths, there are these kind of 4 buckets of strengths that are out there. There are strengths that help you kind of execute on things, that help you influence, that help you build relationships, and that are strategic thinking. And when we think about these, right, people who are really good at executing on things, right, these are typically self-motivated, they're results focused, they like things to be efficient, makes things, happen, they work to get things done. And when I think about change, if you're communicating change to folks who are real executors, you're going to talk about how the results are going to be better because of this change, right? And that's where they're going to want to jump ahead on this. They're going to be excited about an idea that is going to make things more efficient. When I think about folks who are more in the influencing strengths bucket, right, these are folks who are more creative typically, that really like to kind of sell the idea. They like around kind of creating energy into influencing others. These are your folks when it comes to change, are great to get on board with the change as early as possible because they're going to get others excited about it, right? This is their piece. They are influencers. They are the ones who are out there who are really excited about getting other people on board with things. And sometimes influencers, they themselves might not be on board with it, but because of their strengths in these areas, they might be good at getting other people on board with things that even they themselves aren't 100% behind. The next are the relationship building people, right? Our strengths, right? These are folks who are very people oriented, right? They are loyal, they're understanding, they're empathetic, they're compassionate. When it comes to change, these are going to be your folks who are going to say, what about the people, right? How is this impacting the people? Is this going to make things better or worse for our people? And often I find folks who have high relationship building strengths sometimes are struggle a little bit more with change than others, right? Because they are worried and concerned about the relationships. And when things change, sometimes relationships also change. And the last group of strengths are these strategic thinking ones, right? These are folks who are your problem solvers. They're focused on what could be. They're really good at analyzing, absorbing information. These are the strengths that people love to help them make better decisions. And when it comes to change management, folks who have high levels of strategic thinking strengths, these are the ones who are going to want to see the change as something that is solving a problem, right? That we are changing this because it's really going to be helpful. It's going to make things better in the future. One of the strategic thinking strengths is actually called futuristic, right? So when you have people who have a strength of futuristic, they're going to see change as something that's going to be helpful for them in the future. So I'd love to give like quick examples to see, right, of what happens when you have people when they lead with these particular strengths, and lead not meaning that they're a leader, but like these are their top strengths. So when I look at someone who might have high executing versus someone who has high relationship building, right? My high executing person, right? They want detailed lists and action plans. They want to ensure accountability. They're going to overcome obstacles. My relationship building folks are going to be fostering trust and collaboration. They want to support team members emotionally through a change. They're going to ensure inclusivity. They're going to address concerns. So when I think about sitting in a meeting with these folks, right, my executing strengths folks are going to be the ones saying, great, give me the list, right? Give me the to-do list. Show me all the steps we have to do. We're going to get through this. We're going to be helpful. My relationship building people are going to be wanting to have conversations about this. Right. My relationship builders are going to show up to the meeting and say, hey, Ella, how was your weekend? Like, let's chat about that and see what's going on in Amanda's life these days. Like, we're going to chat for the first 5 or 10 minutes, where my executing strength people are going to come in and be like, let's get down to business. Right. And so knowing what your lens is and knowing the lens of the people around you can be really helpful. Right. In the same way, when I think of my influencing strengths and my strategic strengths, right? My influencers, these are folks who really want to kind of communicate the benefits. Like I said, these are ones who are really good about building buy-in. They're going to motivate others to embrace the change. My strategic folks are going to be the ones who are going to see the situation. They're going to see future possibilities. They're also going to be the ones who anticipate the potential challenges. Right. My strategic thinking folks are going to look at this and say, what about, what if, have you thought about, right? And if you haven't done a good job communicating change in the beginning, if these are folks who are new to the change, they've just heard about it, these are the folks who are going to be emailing you 3 and 4 days later going, hey, I really thought about that. And right, they're going to take some time often and come back to you with their thoughts on it. So as you're thinking about, right, who might need some of that time, often your strategic thinkers are going to need a little bit extra time to get on board with it, just because they're going to want to ask the questions to decide some of the strategy. And the last piece I always talk about with teams when we're talking about change is about this idea of making sure to be compassionate during this. One of the most interesting pieces of research I think Gallup did, and this is, I think it was 30 years ago as it first came out, and it just kind of keeps getting kind of reinforced through the years, is that what team members need from their leaders are 4 things. And the 4 things they found that people need are trust, compassion, stability, and hope. And so they need trust. They need to trust their leaders. They need to trust that their leaders are going to do what they say and say what they do, right? They need to trust that the people in leadership have their kind of mind in the right place and their actions are, trustworthy. We'll skip compassion for now because we're going to talk about that more. So there's trust, compassion, stability. People want to know that they're going to have a job tomorrow, right? They want to know that their job is stable, that the place they work is stable. This is a little tricky, right? Because no job is 100% sure. I've done career coaching for many years as well. And I'll have people reach out to me and say, I just want a job that I know I can have from now until I retire. And I was like, there's nothing I can guarantee you that you are going to have a job every day from now until you decide to retire, right? if you'd asked me before COVID, I would have been like, oh yeah, healthcare, right? And we always need healthcare workers. And then during COVID, right, how many healthcare workers got laid off because like I have a friend who was a surgical tech. They were only doing emergency surgeries. Many surgical techs got laid off because they weren't doing surgeries. That's not what was happening in the hospitals. Um, so again, trust, compassion, stability, and hope. Hope is that idea. What people need from their leaders is hope that the future is going to be better than today. And so when we think about change and how you're communicating things as the person rolling out the change or as the leader in this change, you being able to communicate the hope that this change is going to bring, right? That this change is going to really help people. Things are going to be better because of it. And then compassion, right? This was one of the ones that when I work with a lot of executive teams and I work with a lot of kind of C-suite level teams, and I say, these are the 4 things your employees need from you: hope, compassion, stability, and trust. Compassion is the one that I get the most pushback on, right? I get a lot of people who say things like, we're not trying to be a family. This is a workplace, right? This isn't about compassion. This is about work. And I will come back and say, right, people need to know that they have a place there, right? That people feel wanted in their workplace, that people feel that if something's going on in their lives, that they can, get out there and kind of talk about it. People want to feel like their workplace is a good place for them. And so to show compassion to your employees, particularly during times of change, is really important. So how do we do that, right? I think in the beginning, when you're thinking about change, it's starting with the idea of who is actually going to be impacted by that change, right? Is this a company-wide thing, right? Is this a new email or a new HR system or a new payroll system where every single human being is going to be impacted? And we have to really get out there and talk to everyone about it. But even so, right, what is the impact really going to be for particular people, right? There's a difference between, Heidi, who has to sign off on every single person's payroll, or Amanda, who's just, it's going to change how she submits her timesheet this week, right? So kind of thinking about who is this really going to be impacted by this change? And then other times, I think we forget to really look at how the change impacts across the board. We think it might just impact one small group, but when we really sit down and think about it, it impacts a much larger group than we expect it to. So start with really figuring out who is going to. And then try to help people to get through this, right? This is the compassion side. 1, acknowledge the emotions. Often when I'm working with a team, and like I said, I do a lot of work around reorging staff. And so I will say right straight up, because I'll usually be presenting this and saying, listen, some of you are going to read this new org chart and be absolutely thrilled by it. You're going to be like, this makes total sense. I love it. Some of you are going to see this and be really scared about where you're going to fit in the future, right? Or you're going to be nervous about where you're going to fit in, or you're going to wonder if you're going to fit in, right? Or some of you might not like the new jobs that we now have, right? Because we're changing our focus. So making sure that you acknowledge that people are going to be scared or mad or frustrated or whatever it is. As the person rolling it out, make sure you can have a positive mindset about it, right? Because if you're the one rolling this out and you're saying, well, I'm not quite sure if this is the greatest change, right? And I'm not quite sure if this is going to work, it's going to be really hard to get other people on board, right? You have to be behind it. And whoever, if you're having multiple people kind of out there talking about this, make sure that your kind of spokespeople, right, around the change are the folks who are going to be really positive about it. Figure out for folks who's going to need support, like ask people, right? Tell people if they need support during this change to reach out. If it's technology, figure out, right? Not everybody is going to learn how to use a new technology by watching a 15-minute video, or by sitting in a half-hour Zoom class, right? Some people are going to need more support. And so thinking about how are you going to provide more support for folks? And then, right, it's be patient. Now, I will say this is where I get sometimes my C-suite, my senior management folks will say, like, how long do we have to be patient? Right, when it comes to change, right? At some point, it's like, this is the change, you have to get on board. And that's why I always love to use timesheets as that, because at some point, it's like, if you can't submit a timesheet, you can't work there because we need you to submit a timesheet to get paid, right? So yes, offer that support. At some point, I get that the patience does need to run out and people need to get on board with it, right? There is the point where it's like either get on the bus or get off the bus, right? You either need to kind of decide you're coming with us and we'll support you as much as we can, or, you know, you need to decide this isn't the right place for you. But again, give some people some patience with that and make sure you are offering the ability for them to kind of catch up to the change depending on what they need. Um, and my favorite, the meme that I saw flying around all the time, this was like, I think it was last year in January, where people kept saying, right, if cauliflower can be pizza, then, you know, you can change too, right? I'm always like, oh, right, if cauliflower can now become a pizza crust, right, we can all figure out some way to kind of change. It can be painful for some of us. Some people aren't going to be happy and some are going to be great at this. um, this is a QR code to my website if you're interested, but I will also send you an email with these slides after. And with that, we have, I always try to end these at 10 of to give people a chance, because I'm also a firm believer in 50-minute meetings and not hour-long meetings. So we have about 6 minutes left. If folks have some questions or some changes that they've struggled with or ideas around change they would like some feedback on. Yeah, Heidi.
Thanks, Colleen. Really interesting. And I don't know if this is a question or I'll just say what's occurring to me and see if you have anything to weigh in on. I had jotted down early in a question on my notes of what happens if we need to lead toward a change that we ourselves don't relish. And like we just know it's the right thing to do, but I'm thinking like grief kept on coming up for me in the things that you were describing. Like a lot of the recognition of the loss or the change has to do with grief. And so I guess I was just wondering about the approach of like, as a leader, naming our own grief or our own loss or our own like misgivings, even though there is obviously like something pushing us forward, in order to maybe identify team members who say, oh, I know why we should do this. Like, I know I can give you a mission moment as to why you can put that to the side, and then they'll become the cheerleader for that sort of like bringing us back to mission or something. Does that sound like a workable approach, or does a leader need to pretend that they're 100%?
Yeah, you know, so I think it can go both ways. And both ways in the sense of, as a leader, I don't know that I would go full company change with something until I could get behind it, until I've kind of gone through that stage of grief, right? You may have it be a small group of you that understand this until you get it out there to the big group. And I think that's where you can find your kind of evangelists out there, right? Who, you know, maybe it's the group of 4 of you are discussing this. Because I think if you're going to try to roll out change as a leader to a big group, to everybody, and to say, you can say things like, listen, when I first decided, like when we first decided we had to go this way, I get it. This was not where I thought we wanted to be, right? This was hard for me. I've had a chance to live with this. I've had a chance to kind of see, like to sit with this, and I've had a chance to see this is where we do need to go. Like we know we need to go this way. I've seen it a lot with budget cuts, right? Where you're coming out and saying, we have to kind of do these budget cuts. Listen, this isn't my first choice, but I know we have to do this because, and here's the positive outcome piece of that. And then I think if you can get the people who are excited about it to be the ones really on the ground talking about it. But I think if you are still very wary about the change, I would only roll that out to that small group of people in that kind of in those leadership roles. So you can all you can all kind of work through those kind of stages, right? It is the stages of grief, right? It's those same pieces, right? That you can work through some of those before you roll it out to everybody. And that's where I always say the communication is really important, because when you will start to roll it out, you've gone through that already. And so when people are hearing about this the first time, and they're starting, right, they're at stage one, so they're at the, I can't believe we're doing this, I'm so frustrated, like why are we doing this doesn't seem like a great idea. And you've already gotten to the, okay, I'm starting to change my behavior phase. So that's where it gets a little tricky. And that of you communicating and saying, listen, I wasn't on board right away either, but here's how I changed my mind, I think can be really helpful there. All right, so Denise here. Right, nonprofits, significant staff leadership transition, board transition, funding streams are in limbo, right? And so that's always hard. Having worked in many, many nonprofits during my life, and having seen funding streams change drastically. I was at one place that was 100% grant funded. And right, I remember walking in one day and hearing that Department of Labor was no longer funding the grant that I had worked under for 5 years. Right. And you're like, oh, okay, now we need to figure this out. And so to me, a lot of the things that get people through change is the communication piece, right? Is that let's talk through it. Let's make sure that everyone understands where we're going and our whys. And understanding, right, kind of how people react to change. Often, if you were all like an internal team, I would have started this presentation by really talking about how do we all feel about change? Right? Who are my people? Who are my people who love change? If we're in person, I have people line up, right, to say, okay, if you love change on this side of the room, if you hate change over on this side of the room, and where are you in that continuum, right? Let's start to talk and try to find the people who can see the positives on this, so they can help bring some of us along. And I do think, right, leadership transition, every leadership transition equals change, right? New leaders come in and there are new thoughts and ideas that happen, and it can be a real struggle for folks. And I think acknowledging that, to be able to say to folks, hey, right, we do have a new leader and things are changing. And to get us a pulse also on what needs to be changed with a new leader. I also think in that same vein, when new leadership comes in and nothing changes, when everybody feels like changes need to happen, is just as frustrating as someone who comes in and changes everything. Right. I've been in both cases where I worked for a nonprofit that we were all so excited to get a new executive director. And about every 3 months, they would be like, so I'm still assessing to decide what changes we think should be made. And at that point, we're like, do you not see everything? Like, all of us can tell you 100 changes that need to be made. Please pick at least one, right? Let's start doing something and not just kind of sit through. I hope that helps a little bit. Great. All right.
Sometimes it's also about seeing a cycle. Like, I'm new here to the chamber. I started in July, and understanding what a year might be typical and looks like in an organization. And then while that is happening, there's still change developing within that too. So some people are, at the very start of that sort of cycle, right? Where they're like, well, I didn't really learn it yet, so I'm gonna have to hop right on board here. And you see people in different positions in that change, for so many reasons, when they've joined, all of those pieces. And sometimes just being new to a role is change enough. And then And then the other pieces kind of come in and you're like, oh, either we're learning this all together or I feel behind. So I think that can be, you know, where people are in the roles.
Yeah, and I when I think of jobs that I've had, as you were saying, that it just made me think of one of my very first jobs in high school was a cashier at a grocery store. And I will completely age myself for all of you at the moment. But my first week there, I learned to key every single item in on the cash register. And the next week I showed up and scanners had shown up. Right. And we all learned how to use the scanners. It was like the coolest thing. And I think about, gosh, like it was only a week that I had to do that. And I was 16 and I still remember that, like feeling like I couldn't learn anything. And then all of a sudden we were all on the same playing field, right? Which felt great that we were all learning it at the same time. But people who had been there forever did not like that change. Like I can distinctly picture some of the folks who had been there a long time who did not like these ideas.
I think sometimes the folks who ask the questions are afraid that they feel like they're being negative or bringing out these ideas that maybe are problematic with what they're foreseeing. And I wonder how that works, because I think you do have all these different pieces, but I think sometimes those people really struggle to ask the questions because they don't want to be perceived a certain way. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think it brings me back to the communication piece, right? The more we can communicate in the beginning of change, of this is why we're doing the change, right? This is where the thought started. This is where we're at. This is right, because if you're someone right in an organization, and I want to say like, you're not on the leadership team, right? A leadership team might have been discussing this for 6 months, right? When I think of funding streams or things like that, or budget, if I remember being young in an organization and feeling like, right, the budget was just handed to us, and right, like, oh, they probably figured it out this weekend, because the executive director would come in and say, oh, the board voted on the budget, not thinking that for the last 6 months, the whole leadership team was working on this budget over and over and over again, right? So they've had a lot of time with it. So that time, when you think about that kind of reaction, from I'm frustrated, or right, I'm in despair about this, to I accept it, that takes time. And so for your leadership team, they've taken that time. They just haven't had the kind of short period that you've all had. So the more you can communicate and the more you can say, right, we thought about all these things. Often I will say right, when I'm running through change with a team, to say, here's the 10 things the leadership team's already thought of, right? We've already thought of the things that you're automatically going to think are wrong with this, right? And here's kind of our thought process. So I feel like I constantly say, right, communication is one of those things that I've yet to see an organization, when I've come to them and say, how's communication here, where everyone's like, it's great, everything's perfect, right? So I think no matter what, it's kind of finding that balance and figuring out, how do we make sure the team gets enough information and are not overwhelmed? Yeah, Heidi.
Sorry, I don't want to let you go with more questions, but I don't want to jump
Sure.
if there's other people. But you posed the question kind of abstractly of like, do you like change or not? And I'm trying to think for myself. And my answer is obvious for myself, that like I love change. I'm very excited about change, when it has a good reason, as long as some things are sort of, they're not changing. So, it's like, I live in the same house for 30 years. I have a marriage of 34 years. I've been in the same job for 20 years. And then I change like my hobbies every 5 seconds or whatever, like
Right.
some steadiness, right? So I'm just thinking, you had said earlier that people really worry about what else will change. And that would be me if I were, not leading a change. And it makes me wonder whether it's advisable to sometimes say, we're going to put some flags in the ground. We're looking at XYZ as a change. So let's all reassure ourselves, like what are the important things that we need to know are in place and are not changing? Is that too constraining because you kind of need to have everything open as a possibility, or is it a good idea to say you can all rest assured that these will stay?
Yeah, and I mean, I obviously it's a little bit situational, but I would say to folks, right, this is what's changing, this is what's not, right? Or this is what's changing, and we know the ripple effect of this is going to be down the line. This is going to eventually have to change, not right now, but eventually this will change, right? Because I think it just takes people time to adapt to these things, right? We all, every time I rearrange furniture, I'm the one who hits my hip on everything and, bangs my shin on the coffee table. And then all of a sudden 1 week goes by and I don't do it anymore, right? Because eventually we adapt to it. Or I think in the workplace, the choice is, do you adapt to it or do you choose not to work there anymore? Right. I also worked for an organization, a nonprofit, where I felt like the vision had changed with a new executive director. And after 6 months, I realized it was not the right place for me. Right. Gave it a chance and realized I didn't like the direction it was going. It didn't feel like, the mission didn't align anymore. I was lucky that I figured that out myself and didn't have to be escorted out for such things. But I don't know that I would have lasted much longer in my vocalness of not appreciating the change. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. Like I said, I will send the slide deck to all of you. I think we'll have the recording as well that we will be able to send out to folks. If you have any questions, you can always shoot me an email. Once I send that email, you'll have my email to email me back. Thanks
Katie,
everyone for
did you
joining.
have anything?
I just wanted to thank Colleen so much for getting us going in this series, the Link&Learn series, and to again give a little shout out to Florence Bank for supporting this educational time that we all have together. Thank you, Colleen.